By definition, the term organic is confusing, to say the very least. There are so many different ways to define it that everything gets lost in the muddle. It's incredibly difficult to actually understand what the word means. In a general sense, the word organic means that it's derived either ultimately or chiefly from living things. In chemistry, the word organic means that it's primarily carbon or it is carbon containing. In farming, the word organic means without the use of chemical fertilizers. This is kind of meant to be confusing in my opinion, because if you don't know what definition you're looking for, you don't know what you're buying. And so, like in our previous labeling video, everything gets confusing and you don't actually know what you're buying, despite you might know the meaning of the words on the label, but you don't actually know what they mean in this specific context, in this specific setting, on this specific piece of food. I've been told my whole life that organic means different things. The school that I used to go to, our farm was organic and we had an organic compost, but we couldn't use the organic compost on the organic farm. The primary reason for that was because the food that went into the compost was not regulated. There was no way to tell whether or not the food that was going in and getting digested by the pile was organic itself. And so in Vermont at that specific time, if you had food that was inorganic in the farming sense, of course it was once living matter, but inorganic in the farming sense, you can't then use that as compost in a basis for your soil on an organic farm because it has inorganic compounds, and thus would disqualify that organic rating that you might be going for on your farm. You can see how this gets confusing, and especially confusing when you realize that things vary not only state by state, but they can vary by organization and by county. It's absolutely bonkers. I've always been confused by it, and in fact, before I did this interview, I didn't buy organic. I know that might be a shocker for you, but I didn't buy organic because I thought that it was meaningless, and I thought that the extra dollars I would have been spending didn't mean anything. They didn't go anywhere, and I was just paying for a label that somebody didn't work for and that didn't actually qualify my food to meet extra standards. Even though I was looking for those standards, I believed that there was no way to actually effectively regulate it in the mass amount of farming that goes on out there. But after talking to Jamie Williams, who you may remember from a previous farm tour video, she absolutely changed my mind on the subject, and I think she'll probably change your mind too. So a very special thank you to her, and check it out with some awesome B-roll of her farm down in beautiful Castle Valley, Utah, which we're so fortunate to return to because I live here. But it's not any less beautiful because of that. In fact, I think it's a little bit more beautiful and a little bit more special. So enjoy the video, and I'll see you at the end.
To become certified organic, so there's private certifiers, and you get, in business with one of them. And what they say is that follow the USDA certification regulations, and there's this big huge packet, and you can go through all the regulations and make sure you're following all of them. And it basically says, if you boil it down to, don't use any synthetic chemicals, use all organic seeds, plant organic plants, don't add any unorganic materials to your soil. That's pretty much the gist of it, but there are varying degrees of it. There's a list of things that you can use in organic standards that you can't, that you could never use the list of conventional stuff in organic standards. So you basically follow that, and then the certifiers come out and you keep records of everything. That's the big thing, is I have very stringent records of everything I plant, the seeds that I use, where I buy them, what crop rotations I'm doing. Oh, that was the other thing about organic standards. They want you to show that you're improving your land, not taking away from it. So improving your soil, basically. So they're very interested in whether or not your crop rotation is happening, whether or not you're even companion planting, what kind of diversity you're adding into your farm. Are you building hedgerows to support native pollinators and beneficial insects? And then there's the other side of if you're using pesticides, they have to be natural. You have to keep records of that. Every input you have to keep records of. Your compost piles, you have to measure their temperature every day to make sure that they're reaching standards. So it's pretty stringent. I think it's more stringent than people think it is. As long as you keep all those records, then you're good to go. And then the certifiers come out and they just look around and make sure your records match your farm, and like, oh, you harvested 50 cantaloupe. And so it makes sense that you have 2 rows of cantaloupe that you have in your records, 50, pounds. That's it. But if they might see something fishy if you're like, I harvested 200 pounds of cantaloupe and I only have 2 rows of them, there's, starting to find discrepancy. So usually it's pretty easygoing. I think they become more stringent in large monocropping organic situations. And in that situation, it's like they're not really improving the soil per se or doing diversity, but they're still following regulations. So regulations in organics are vague in some ways. I want to say they're designed to aim for the best, but you can get away with the bare minimum. And that's kind of how organic certifiers go. Depends on who your organic private certifier company is too. Most certifiers follow USDA regulation. And then you've got certifiers that are much more stringent, higher quality. They're going to hold you to a higher degree of what you're doing for your land. And that's Oregon Tilth, Demeter certified, which is the biodynamic certification. They are we're going to make sure that you are improving your soil diversity. That's what we care. Diversity of microorganisms, fertility, you're improving your land, you're benefiting all the living things on your land. So it's different levels of certification, I'm going to say. So the question is, is there a point when farmers just, find it so hard to break through the glass roof of certifying their farms? It's so much trouble or money that it's why am I even doing this? I think a lot of farms reach that because it's a lot of money if your land was previously conventional farming. So if you're on land that's been conventionally farmed, doesn't matter how many years, 1 year, 30 years, your process between getting that certification is 3 years. So you have to start your records, and then you have to do this you have to organically do everything for 3 years straight. That's a lot of investment for very little return in money because you're still getting conventional prices. Whereas, I want to say a lot of organic farmers have switched from conventional to organic because they truly believe in it. And I think a lot of them believe in it down the line. But I think originally a majority of farmers switch over because it's more economical these days. You're a small farmer, you flip to organics from conventional, suddenly your food can be bought at twice the price. It's just a more expensive market, for the consumer. But it's funny because I've been to EcoFarm conference and a lot of the farmers that were conventional and now have flipped over to organics they're preaching about organics because they're like, wow, I just saw life get better. I was fighting against the soil, I was tilling it, I was planting crops, but down the line, they're degrading their soil so much that it's it's a short-term explosion of produce for a long-term, just decline in fertility and produce. Whereas organic is actually a huge investment up front, but then it's this gradual upswing of fertility and production and very minimal pest damage because you're creating a diverse environment. So that's the kind of way I look at it. And a lot of those conventional flipping to organic farmers are just at eco-farming, praise organics. I just want to tell you all about it. And I don't work as hard and I don't use as much equipment and I'm getting as much yield and it's tasting better and my land's happier and I'm happier, my wife's happier. So it's just I think you really have to have faith. Another thing is that here's the funny thing about organics that I find is that you have to plant organic plants and organic seeds, right? If you don't do that, the majority of plants that I want to plant in a garden to improve the habitat for beneficial insects are not available in seed or organic plants. They're coming from nurseries, specialty growers. I can plant those in my organic garden, but I can't certify them organic for about a year, nor can I grow anything around them to sell as organic. So it's almost this standard kind of sets up a barrier for creating diversity in your farm or garden for beneficial insects. And so that's a catch-22 to me. And often I would just designate entire swaths of my borders to be like, okay, this is not going to be organic because I want all these beautiful plants. I want leptospermum for the bees. I want this certain kind of lavender that will be excellent, and I want salvia that nobody grows for the hummers, and this is all going to be sitting there for a year waiting to be certified. So that's what they always do, which is so funny to me, is the standard is you also have to make sure that these plants were not GMO and that they're not sprayed with any chemicals, which is really, really easy to do because there's only like 5 or 6 plants that are GMO. And that's what is funny in the standards. Like, whenever you get citrus trees, you're never going to find an organic citrus tree and you're never going to find a GMO citrus tree, but they still ask you that. They're like, is this GMO, non-GMO, and certified non-sprayed? And I'm like, well, it's not certified non-sprayed, but it's definitely not GMO. Obviously, everybody knows that. So that's kind of a funny catch-22.
So you mentioned conventional farming versus organic farming.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's kind of a misnomer, or what are your thoughts on the words conventional farming being used for artificial fertilizers and pesticides and things like that? Because we're saying the words conventional, but that type of farming has only been conventional for 200 years or less.
Yeah, but unless you defined conventional as the majority of farming that's happening in this country. And that's unfortunately the truth. I don't know what the statistics are right now, but I think it's still something ridiculous, like 93% of all farming in this country is still conventional. So yeah, it does own the word. And it's funny that you say this, because I always think about this when I say conventional farming to people, because people always go, what kind of farming is that? And they automatically assume when I say conventional, they assume I mean organic, which I mean the opposite. And then organic is such a buzzword, it's such a trigger word in people's minds that as soon as you say organic, it's like this flood of politics comes into their minds, like being misled through, food, like the fact that it's more expensive, the conspiracies behind it. And a lot of times I remember sitting next to a bunch of the students in my cohort at Cal Poly for a master's in agriculture, and they were all come out of the FFA system, Future Farmers of America system, and that is a very conventionally focused system. And they were sitting around, and one of them was like, oh my God, I went to the supermarket and all they had was organic peaches, and I'm not going to buy organic peaches. And someone else was like, yeah, I never support organics. And I'm looking around, I'm like flabbergasted, I'm like, and I asked the question, like, why don't you support organic agriculture? And they're like, well, it's all like, basically they said it's hooey. It's just a bunch of BS that, like the certifications, like it's so easy to get certified, and it's just a money-making scheme. And it really saddened me because they had never actually been on an organic farm or even took the time to learn anything about it. And they didn't know what it took to be certified. And I had seen both sides because I was lucky I had in my undergrad, I had a conventional large dairy farmer, vet, and I had a permaculture organic vegetable grower, and those are my 2 teachers. So they would flip every week. They go on a different field trip. So like 1 week we go to an 18,000 chicken confined egg operation that would make you cry, and then the next week we go to a Mennonite dairy farm that's all organic, and then vice versa. So I felt like I really knew both sides of it, and I'm never one to point a finger or to just shut down another side. Like, I understand the validity of conventional farming. That's our system. That's our industry. We can't just break from it all of a sudden, and flip to organics. It's just not going to happen. And so it just really saddened my heart that these folks that are getting masters in agricultural education are just knew nothing about organics, and we're just shutting it down. It's stupid. It's I'm gonna give it names, and I'm gonna have emotion behind it, instead of just having a conversation and removing the emotion and just talking about really trying to understand the logic of it and what's happening. And that's what I think people just need to remove their emotions from actual conversations so they can start to learn things. Because when we're closed off or angry, we're not really hearing anything. It's only when we're in the green, when we're ready to accept ideas, that we can talk about things. And I think that's, our food system is such a hot topic because it's wrapped up in a lot of emotion. I mean, the majority of people are sick in this country with curable diseases because of our food system. And instead of actually just sitting down and having a conversation about that, it's everybody's pointing fingers and calling names. And so I think it's really important, that question you just asked, like, how do you feel about the word conventional? Recognizing that is an emotional trigger, that everyone thinks it means something else, that they're not, educated on it. But at the same time, most people aren't educated in what organic really means, even though it's a huge buzzword to them, and that it brings up a lot of emotion. It's also tied in money, like we never want to spend more money for our food, which is crazy to me, because I think that we should have less material stuff and start buying more delicious, nutritious food. That is a better, use of our money, is our health, than our material gain. But we worship the dollar in the United States, so I guess we're paying homage to our God. So yeah, there's a lot of, the question is kind of like, I think people have heard or think that there's a lot of phony certifiers out there that are certifying farms to be organic when they don't really meet the requirements or the moral standards to be an organic farm. I'm just gonna say, like, as I said before, there's a real bare minimum that you can get away with, which is basically don't use any synthetic chemicals. You can still use pesticides, but those pesticides need to be derived from a natural source. So, like, as an example, neem oil. Neem oil is it's not poison to us, but it's not the best thing for us to, like, directly consume. It's semi-toxic, but it's derived from the neem nut. Therefore, it's a natural product. Therefore, it's fine to spray neem oil on the crop. And so there are some things done, if you were a really good organic farmer, if you really cared, you would use neem oil, but you would make sure that it was quite far away from that harvest date so that the residual's not there. But another part of it is, I think the biggest thing that is not met, the minimally met in organic farming, is diversity. Diversity to me is my favorite word. It is the most important thing if you're a farmer, because what you're doing is you're trying to mimic as closely as possible nature's recipes. And what does nature do? As much diversity as possible so that environment is balanced. Now, if you have, the majority of large organic farms are not diverse at all. They are purely like monocropping, but they're doing like all watermelon. They're using specific harvest equipment for that. They might be improving the soil by adding back compost, but they're not really improving habitat for like insects and pollinators. And what's interesting about that is in organic standards, it's very vague. It says they're working toward improving habitat for beneficial insects. That they can get away with planting like 3 lavender plants and be like, we're working toward it. So that's where the vagueness comes in, and I think that's where that people say like, there's the standards aren't really that high. The other thing that I've never personally come across, because all of my inspectors have been really stringent to the point of like I almost like choosing me because we're so diverse, is like going through all my records like crazy because they can. But I've heard of other inspectors that, these are rumors, so I can't say that this is true, but like can be swayed or bribed toward certifying farms that are not really working toward great soil fertility or working toward diversity in any way. So I would say take that off the record, because I really don't believe in gossip and hearsay. I think that we all need to experience it personally, and I think through gossip and hearsay and like these rumors, we create more damage. So in my experience, I've always had like really positive experiences with my certifiers, and they've always been very knowledgeable in what they were looking for and what we're doing. And it's always nice when they walk into our farms, because there's like, my last farm had like over 600 different plants, and walking in and being like really impressed at how much we're trying to encourage life in our garden. So yeah, I don't know how to answer that question because I never personally have had that interaction. What's interesting about the certification, organic certification in this country, is it was started, and it's still today, majority of it run by grassroots movement. And what I mean by that is it's people who wanted a certification that met their values and their standards that they wanted to set for healthy soil, healthy land, healthy plant, healthy human. So I would say there's probably some farms out there that are not meeting even minimal standards that are getting certified because they're big and they got money and influence. And to say that there aren't is not logically possible. I mean, if you did the numbers, yes, we're not the only like intelligent beings. You know, there's aliens out there. If you do the math, it's like improbable that there isn't. You know, so I'm sure there are some farms out there that are bribing and not really meeting the minimal certification. But I would say in my heart, the majority of organic farmers are doing this because they believe in it. And the majority of organic certifiers are certifiers and started the company because they believe in it. And that's probably what I'm going to say. You know, no system's perfect. But I go to the largest organic farming conference on the West Coast every year, Eco Farm, which is not happening this year, and I'm really upset. But the majority of people there are they do it because it is a lifestyle. It is their religion. It is absolutely what they believe in every single day. And it's for them, money is not the most important thing. Like if money was important, like organic farmers would be paid like $2 an hour because that's how much they work, you know. And it's about the work itself, about the return and that pride you get and how much more connected you are to the land and to your food and how proud you are to sell that food to someone else. Okay, so this is a concept that I would often try and impart on my teenagers when I was a high school teacher, and it was such a hard concept to them, and I find it fascinating, but it's even a harder concept to the adults, is that the things that we like to throw in the trash can and consider waste, like food scraps and even like us going to the restroom and flushing our turds down the toilet, we are throwing away energy. And I haven't gotten into human manure on this farm, don't worry. But I'm just saying that in the past, humans would take food scraps, all natural substances, and they would recycle them into compost. They would put them in their garden, and because they knew that it wasn't waste, but energy. I mean, that's what nature, teaches us. The leaves fall to the ground, the leaves compost, and the leaves give energy to the plants that are down there. And this concept of waste is such a modern and kind of a horrific concept. And if we started thinking about things as energy and always recycling them, then your world can change. It took me a while to get into the habit of starting to throw all my food scraps into a bucket and then throwing that into a compost. But then it just felt so natural. And anytime I'm over at someone's house and they throw something into the trash can that I can compost, it feels icky to me because I'm like, oh, wasted energy. This could go to my plants. So you can see that this is just a compost pile that we created about 3 months ago. And yes, I am rifling through manure because it's energy. But this is actually pretty well composted. Kind of getting down in here. So that was food scraps, sawdust, manure, soil, and that's what happens after 2 months of composting. We put some earthworms in here, so after they finish this, which is like the great nature tillers, they are magical beings, this will be like what we call a farmer black gold. Literally crumbly, gorgeous black soil that is incredibly nutritious for our plants. But if you could create this magic, why wouldn't you? Is all I'm saying. Because this right here is pure magic to me. So.
Well, look who's still here at the end of this long video. I very much so appreciate your viewership, and I would like to extend a very sincere and very warm thank you to Jamie for helping me with this project. I truly don't believe that there are many people better qualified for such a thing than you. I can just feel the passion absolutely radiating off of you when you start to talk about food and farms, and just thank you for helping me with this. I hope to outreach to many folks with this video and spread the word of what organic actually means. And like I said at the beginning, Jamie definitely changed my mind about how I shop for my groceries. If you want to check out some of the other videos, we have a few about food labeling, what the other labels other than organic mean. You can check them out in just a second. And there's also another video that also includes Jamie, where you can see a more comprehensive tour of her farm that includes some of her farm workers. So thanks again, Jamie and the crew, and I'll see you next time. Remember to stay hungry for organic food, and I'll see you later.
Like, okay. This is like Timothy. Hey, there we go.
There you go.
I understand it, but I'm going off on a tangent. Okay. Let me see, what else was I gonna say? Did I answer your question?